All right, welcome to the Learning Lounge podcast. I am Dr. Joel Gardner, and if you are a teacher right now, particularly a higher education instructor, you're probably having a pretty tough time because you have to take your courses online due to the global health crisis. So in this podcast, we're going to speak with experts who can give you some simple tips and strategies to help you move your course to an online format. So I am here today with three of my esteemed colleagues, people I've worked with for years. First, we have Dr. Connie Wanstreet. She's been coordinating, right now she coordinates our Franklin University's Title III grant. And the goal here is to increase student retention and graduation for our online courses. But she's actually been training faculty to teach online for over 15 years. She even co-wrote a book titled Jumpstart Your Online Classroom. So she's going to bring us some of these really practical strategies that you can use from those experiences. We also have Jesse Fuhrman. He's one of the design faculty members at Franklin University, and he has degrees from multiple universities, including a Master's of Arts in Technology of Instruction and Media from The Ohio State University. He's taught online at multiple universities and designed for universities all over the world. And then Roberta Nichi is another design faculty member here at Franklin who has a master's in education and instructional technology. She's worked as a K-12 teacher, an officer in the U.S. Navy leading staff development. She teaches as well in higher education. And so she brings a lot of that experience in the classroom and also has designed courses for universities all over the world. Same with Dr. Wanstreet. So we have this really rich group of people who have just dozens and dozens of years of experience helping people move to online and doing online work. So again, we're in the context now that there's this global health crisis. Higher ed instructors almost everywhere are moving their courses to this online instruction. Now, here at Franklin, the majority of our students were already online because we've been doing online for decades now. But we're going to provide some of those strategies. So what I think we'll start out with is, I mentioned earlier that Dr. Wanstreet has co-authored this book, Jumpstart Your Online Education. And in that book, Connie, you guys talk, you and your co-author, Dr. Stein, you focused on 5 big key strategies that people can use. So let's go through some of these 5 strategies here. What's the first strategy that you give and trick and tip that you give to new online instructors?
Well, first of all, Joel, you have to begin to think of yourself as an online instructor. You have to develop an online persona. And you do it the same way online as you do in person. It's just you use your words and your actions. So how this might look in a class is that you have spaces to build communities and make connections. You might have an online cafe, or you might have an Ask the Instructor discussion space. Anything that helps you come across as an authentic person is what you need to do now to get your online persona up to snuff.
This is great. So it's really sounds like finding ways to create that presence in the online environment. So what are some strategies that you might have worked, it's just talking to everyone generally, that you've used to create this online persona or this presence?
Yeah, I think Connie really hit number one is number one for a reason. I think students need to see our faces and hear our voices all the time, but particularly now when there's such difficult times. And there's some really concrete ways you could do this, I think. Assuming that you're working in a learning management system, I think it's good to start your week with an announcement to all of your learners. Kind of clue them in on what's going on in your life a little bit, be human to them, and then just give an overview. Here's what we're working on this week. And sometimes I would like to record a short video of that and just drop that into the course every week. And that's not hard to do. Low-tech things you could do. You can email your students frequently. You can host sessions using Zoom, or if you have Blackboard, then you have Collaborate Ultra. Don't be afraid to have sessions face-to-face with your students and let them hear your voice and see your face, and give them opportunities to work with each other as well. I think a lot of social presence has to do with the type of assignments that you create. Let them interact with each other on discussion boards. Let them create short videos that they share with each other. Simple things like that keep the human touch in your course.
I love it. You mentioned pre-recording videos. What I've noticed is if I focus in on some key concepts that I know in my face-to-face class that students struggle with. I'll really focus in on those concepts or those strategies or whatever they are, focus in on those and record some videos or maybe create some visuals that really help them learn those. So that's great. Jesse, any other thoughts on creating an online persona and a presence?
Well, when you're starting from the beginning of a term, one of the things I like to do is I give a good introduction of myself, and I usually do something like where I might talk through sort of my background and things like that. When we're trying to shift things directly online, when a course we've already started, I think the biggest thing is maintaining the same kind of attitude that you've had in the in your face-to-face classroom, so that you don't start to seem like a completely different person. Right. So that's a huge thing. So you need to be at least that engaged, if not more so.
Well, and that's a really good point, Jesse, because at this point, I'm guessing that a lot of our students are maybe stressed out or they're uncomfortable with the situation they're in. Not only the learning situation, but generally this is a stressful time for people. So maintaining that consistency in who you're presenting yourself as is important. And also just maintaining a sense of calm control really helps to settle people down. The leader, the instructor is the leader of the class, and the leader sets the culture and the tone for the group. So love it. These are great ideas. So Connie, let's go to your next one. That's the first one, to have this develop an online persona, this presence of who you are in a class. What's the next strategy?
Well, we've talked a little bit already about the importance of communicating with your students, and regular communication is the second strategy. Not only does it relieve anxiety in this time that is so anxious for both the learners and the instructors, but it helps reinforce the major points that you want to make regarding content or the course activities, and helps to get people focused again on the course. So you do this by being available throughout the week through emails or discussion posts, through your course announcements, like Roberta mentioned, and regular feedback on assignments. There is a distance that we want to try to overcome. And one of the ways we do that is just by communicating regularly. And students want you to get on that schedule. They want to know when they can expect to hear something from you.
Yeah, I think having a predictable pattern of activities in the week is a big stress reliever. It offloads a lot of anxiety. And also I think it's important to consider that you may need to chunk things up into smaller bite-sized pieces in your online class than you do in a regular class. So instead of showing a video that you may have shown and take it a class period, give them a series of shorter videos or something to interact with.
This is good.
And it should be, and like you said, Connie, it definitely needs to be multiple times throughout the week.
Mm-hmm.
It's great. It's important to send that, that sort of beginning of the week, here's what to expect kind of thing at the beginning. But you also need to keep up with them throughout the week, checking in with people, making sure that people are there. And, even checking things like, are the students, have they logged in? Most of the systems that we're using have the ability for us to see whether they've logged in or not, and checking in with the people who haven't. It's really easy for a lot of people to not get as involved when they're so separated, especially if they're normally face-to-face students and there's that drive that's, hey, you need to be in class, and then you're there and you do all the interaction and then you leave. But when it's online, there isn't that same kind of automatic drive.
Well, that's a good point, because one of the things that happens is when you're working with in a face-to-face environment, you have in some ways it's easier to sense whether students are drifting away from their learning or kind of falling behind in some ways. But then when you're online, there are some other indicators. Are they even logging into the course? Are they participating in discussions or attending your online meetings, or submitting assignments? And so it is important. I love that you brought that up, Jesse, because there's always those few students who may sort of struggle for a period of time. And what I've tried to do is communicate directly with them, just like you mentioned, and even just say, hey, let's have a quick phone call or a Zoom meeting and just talk through what you're experiencing and what we can go through. And what I found is those meetings are sometimes more about, well, just how are you doing as a human being, and not about their assignment or something. We talk about that, of course, but then once they can talk through what they're dealing with, you can come up with a plan to help them get them back on track. So, all right. So regular communication, that is an excellent strategy. And by the way, I'm thinking about the people who might be, listening or watching this podcast. And these ideas that we're sharing, you don't have to do every single one of these, right? Come up with the strategies that you know will work for your group. Try them out, test them, adjust them until they make sense to you. But okay, so that's the second. Now let's go to number 3, Dr. Wanstreet.
Well, that's right, Joel. What you were saying about choose strategies that work for you. These are ideas that our students have shared with us over a number of years of conducting research on how adults learn in online environments. But in addition to communicating and planning your communication, it's good to get on a consistent schedule of talking to your learners regularly, and you can do this through synchronous meetings like this one using Zoom or Big Blue Button or whatever system your university recommends. So this presents us also as real people, and you can see us and talk to us and nod or frown, and so we can get your feedback immediately. So talking to learners regularly is idea number 3.
Very nice. Thoughts, maybe just a couple of tips from Jesse and Roberta on how to do this well, to use a video conferencing tool well.
Well, go ahead, Jesse.
Go ahead, Roberta.
Okay, so I think it's good to set the standard that cameras are on, because it's one of the most powerful things in your video conferencing tool, is to be able to see people's face and their vocal inflections. And then the second thing that I try to do is, because sometimes people get freaked out by the video conferencing tool and there's so many options and I'm not sure how to use it and I'm afraid I'm going to look silly. So whatever you can do to lower the stakes and to be playful with it and just have that atmosphere of we're all in this together, and yes, we're all going to mess up at some point and it's not a big deal. If you can create that culture and that climate, then that helps your users use the video conferencing in a better way.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's really important. And part of that thing with, keeping the cameras on and things of that sort, there's just so much information that is carried in facial expression. And there's so much more that you can get there. Just like when you're face to face, it's so much easier to see when you've got students who are drifting away as far as their attention goes. And you know that, oh, like, what, I need to reinvigorate this. I need to hook them again and bring them back to what we're talking about. And that is a really important thing. I've taught in some places where you could do video or the instructor could use video or audio, but the students could only chat back. And that made it so much more difficult to do. And so being in a system where you can have, faces being displayed back and forth, in both directions is really important. And it's important for both, for both you as the instructor, but also for your students to see, hey, you know what, this is the same class. We're all here together still.
Can we talk for a minute before we move on about maybe what not to do as far as your video conferencing goes? And so I'm talking about giving a full-blown lecture. So if you're going to do a full-blown lecture, consider recording that and making that a video that students can watch anytime, any place. Because if it's not interactive, there's really no point in doing that in a synchronous session. So maybe what I like to do in my Zoom sessions is I like to do maybe a mini lecture, maybe 5-10 minutes tops, set the stage for the topics, introduce the agenda, and then use breakout groups. If you have that ability in your video conferencing, send students in small teams to collaborate in breakout groups to do something together and then have them come back and share out. Those are some of the things that you could do.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things that I'd like to do, that I would do, especially in a situation like what we find ourselves in now, is I'd be going through my notes about what I plan to do in the next couple of weeks and say, you know what, this is a point here where we have a lot of discussion back and forth. This is a great thing to sort of focus in on in my Zoom session. And then this other stuff over here, this stuff is where I'm starting to talk a lot about things because there's just a lot of information that they have to have that isn't in the textbook, or I need to elaborate on a lot. That part, I'm going to make a quick video and we'll go through that separately. So there's just those basic things that we can do as we go through and plan out sort of the rest of how the term is going to go.
This is
and if you feel like you're,
go ahead,
guys. So if you feel like you need to do a longer lecture, consider using a tool like Socrative. Socrative is, you may be familiar with like student clickers, student response systems, where during a lecture you can pause, ask a question, and the students use their devices to answer up. And so that keeps them engaged in there, and it also gives you information about where they're understanding, where their understanding's falling down, where their muddiest points are. And so that's a good tool for keeping students engaged during a longer lesson question and answer type session in video conferencing. And that it's called Socrative, but there's others. There's Kahoot, there's Pear Deck, and those are the three main ones that we work with.
Wonderful. Well, what's tip number 4, Dr. Wanstreet?
Well, what we've been talking about is how to keep the students engaged. And I want to say here that what you're just are practices that work very well when you get back to teaching face-to-face too. Teaching online gives us opportunities that we might not have thought about face-to-face. What you need to do though is stay involved, and you stay motivated, and you want to keep your course on track. But at the same time, you can give up some control of the learning spaces, and you can trust that your students will learn from you, yes, but they'll also learn from each other if you give them a chance, and they'll learn from the course material too. So all this is part of just how we can stay involved in the course.
Mm-hmm.
Very nice.
Right. I agree. And I think part of this is being familiar with cooperative learning strategies. So if you're not familiar with jigsaw strategy or think, pair, share, or things like that, those are things that you should investigate and put those in your instructor bag of tricks, is ways to have students working together. And then find a platform that works for you and your students for collaboration, whether it be the Google Suite, Google Docs, Google Slides, or the equivalent in Microsoft Office, the Office online programs. But a way that students can work together to collaborate on a document or on a presentation. Those make for really good project tools.
Very nice. Other thoughts, Jesse or Connie, about staying involved to keep your course on track?
I guess the thing is just, you know, having, like we talked about before with that regular communication, you know, making sure that there's, that you're able to keep going with yourself. So having a schedule and things of that sort, but also making sure that the students have the opportunities to stay involved with the course. If the only things that they're doing is, you know, going through assignments and the once a week maybe video lecture, you know, or a Zoom session or something of that sort, that doesn't give them necessarily the amount of opportunity that you really want for them to really stay engaged in the course. So multiple opportunities throughout the week to do something like that is probably better.
That's right. We encourage students to keep a calendar and to help manage their time, but we can do that ourselves in order to get ourselves on a steady calendar. And what you find, and this will be the fifth idea, is that teaching online can take over your life, because you do want to be responsive to emails. They might be coming in at any hour of the day or night. Phone calls from students come in at some unusual times because they're working when it's convenient for them. So don't forget to balance your online teaching with other aspects of your life. We all need to take better care of ourselves right now. Taking care of yourself is the fifth big idea. So through time management and balance, this is what will help you maintain your presence for your students.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is important. One of the things that I've done, and you mentioned this, is whenever I'm teaching an online class, I'll make sure to schedule the key activities. So, you know, in our university, students submit their assignments typically on Sunday. So I make sure that Monday afternoon, I've blocked out my time, and I always complete my grading Monday afternoon maybe Tuesday morning, depending on how much grading I have to do. Respond to emails every morning, just respond to emails, keep it scheduled that way, and I'll respond throughout the day as well. But just have this discussion posts. I always make sure Thursday morning, this is the time. So have a schedule for doing a lot of these things and making sure you're connected, and it really helps me to stay on top of it. Instead of responding or grading, at random times, helps me stay on track.
Right.
I have two bits of advice for that. And the first one comes from the first time I taught online. My supervisor actually dinged me because I was getting too involved in the discussion posts. And he said, "You're responding to everyone's discussion post. You're not leaving enough room for the students to respond to each other. Back off."
Yeah.
So that, you kind of have to resist the temptation and trust that your students will respond to each other. And maybe, if you need to go in and stir the pot a little bit and ask a divergent question or something, do that. But generally, let the students run the discussion and then come in maybe at the end and wrap it up. And the second thing is, I save myself a lot of time by trying to think through things like a student and anticipating the kinds of questions that they're going to ask, and trying to figure out where they may fall down. And I get that information out to them in advance, so I'm not having to respond to a lot of questions. And I think the directions that you write for an online class have to be super clear. And you're always walking that fine line between giving them all the information they need to be successful without overwriting it to the point where the students will tell you, TLDR, too long, didn't read it. So be complete, be clear, but don't overwrite it. Right. And those things save me from a lot of student questions.
Great. So these are the 5 tips and strategies. I'm going to recap them for us, Dr. Wanstreet. So the first, you've got to develop that online persona, the presence of who you are. Jesse kind of helps us recognize, maintain consistency from who you were in your face-to-face class to your online. Have regular communication with your students so that they feel your presence, they have the direction they need. Talk to your learners regularly. Use those video conferencing tools so that they're engaged with you. They see your face. They're able to interact with you and with their peers. Stay involved, right? Keep engaged in all of those learning activities, reaching out to students, responding, grading in a timely manner. But then, of course, take care of yourself so that you stay balanced in your life. This is a strange, stressful time. Keep that balance and take care of yourself as we move forward. Excellent strategies, Dr. Wanstreet. So really quickly, this has been really helpful, I think. And let's just talk about a few questions that new online instructors may be having right now. So we talked to one of our team members for this podcast, talked to his wife who teaches at a university and has had to go online. And these are some of the questions that she was asking, and perhaps some of her peers were asking. So first question here, how do you maintain strong student and faculty interaction in an online environment? How do you maintain that? So let's just give some strategies.
We've talked about this a little bit with regular communication, with responding to discussion posts, emails, course announcements. Faculty, instructor-student interaction occurs pretty frequently, kind of naturally in an online environment, I think.
I think the biggest thing is to recognize that that while you're doing all of these things, that is student and faculty interaction, and that it may not be the same as what you've got in a face-to-face course, but that it can be just as meaningful and just as helpful to the relationship that you're trying to keep.
I feel like in teaching online, I know my students as well or better teaching online than I do face-to-face. And that's because in an online class, there's nowhere to hide. If there's an assignment to post, everybody posts. Unlike sometimes in a classroom when you could ask that same question for discussion and kind of a small subset of students will actually answer and participate. Not so in an online class. So, and that's just one example. Let me slip in a recommendation for a favorite tool here for increasing that engagement. If you haven't tried Flipgrid, try it out. This is a simple tool for allowing students and instructors to create short videos and put them on a website where you could see each other's videos and respond to them with further videos and have a conversation. And it's just flipgrid.com. And it works great in a web browser. It works great on a phone. And keep in mind, a lot of your students may not have laptops who are shifting to online. They may have tablets or phones, and they're trying to do all their classwork on that. Flipgrid makes it so super simple. You log in, you hit a button, you record your video, boom, it's on the web. You can go see your classmates' videos and respond. Super great.
Excellent. Good. And the one thing I noted here for how to maintain that strong student and faculty interaction is make sure you're providing quality feedback on any assignments that your students are submitting to you. Just give good feedback. Make it timely, so you're giving feedback quickly as soon as you're possible. Make sure that it is something that's in context so they understand, that's actionable so that they can actually take action and make changes. So good feedback. So the next question that you may be having as an online instructor right now for our listeners is, what's the best way to engage students and measure student engagement? So we've talked about a lot of ideas, but what's your response? Best way to engage students and measure that engagement?
Jesse mentioned earlier that these course management systems do help you measure engagement to a certain extent. They let you know who's logged in, how long they've had the site open. That's one thing that people do. Sometimes there's a heat map that shows you which assignments got a lot of traffic. That's one thing you can do. But this is why I have a session every week, a synchronous session every week, because I can tell who attends, how are they doing on their assignments. It's the same kind of thing I do in face-to-face classes. You measure engagement by whoever participates. And that's not really any different online.
Very nice.
And I had mentioned previously the tool Socrative, and I like to use that during video conferencing sessions. And some of my questions will be, do you understand this concept? Answer up, and I could see what percentage of the class understands and what percentage of the class doesn't. But then I can also check in and see, on how they're feeling as individuals and get that feedback on, so I usually will start with, what's your rating today of how you're feeling about the course or about how things are going in life right now? And so I can kind of take the temperature of everybody before the session even starts using that tool. And then I like to end my sessions with a Socrative, what they call an exit ticket, where I ask the students to identify their muddiest point of all the things we've talked about and you've worked on this week. What's still unclear to you? And then I get the aggregated information about the class, but then I can also see for each individual what their individual muddiest point was. And then when I'm done with that, I go and I'll make a video and explain those muddiest points to them and drop the video in the course.
Excellent. Good. So these are some great ways to engage these students and even measure engagement. And all those ideas those top 5 strategies we talked about earlier, these also all are designed to help engage those students. So here's another question that we had. How do you know if you've created a reasonable workload for these students, for the students in these online classes? How do you know?
Jesse, you want to talk about Rice?
Yeah. So the Center for Teaching Excellence at Rice University actually has a great tool for measuring the workload of the amount of writing and the kind of reading that you have set up in your class. And we actually use this for all of our courses. Just to try and make sure that we've targeted the right amount of work for a given number of credit hours in a given amount of time. And it does a really great job of really helping you sort of get your mind around the fact that, that if, and I think it's geared mostly towards undergrad courses, how much time it takes to write a paper. Sometimes we forget as experts who write papers all the time that our students are still novices at this. right? So there's a classic, sort of novice expert, gap of understanding. And so this kind of a tool can really help sort of help you gauge that kind of information and try to say, okay, well, did I, did I assign too much work? Did I assign too much reading? How long is it going to take to write this paper? That kind of thing.
Well, and this tool is helpful not only for an online class, but for building a face-to-face class and just saying, okay, I want to make sure I'm not overkilling it here, or I want to make sure that number of student work hours to the credit hour ratio and so forth. So it's a nice tool. So that's really a good insight.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing I would say is, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna, and we can give this up later too, but it's cte.rice.edu/workload.
Awesome. Yeah, and we'll link that. We'll make sure to link that in our descriptions too. So that's really helpful.
I was just blown away to find out, you could set it for what type of reading is it, like what level of difficulty. And if it's at a textbook level and you're asking them, and it's like fairly new information, and it's fairly, like a medium setting on how technical it is, it's like 10 pages an hour is the fastest reading rate. And then like for doing research, if it's like new information with only like a minimal amount of research and like maybe one draft, then it's going to take 3 hours per page to write that paper. And wow, we were really giving too much work for the credit hours before we started using this tool. So.
The other thing I would say, and so we use these kinds of tools when we design online classes. And then, and so for instructors who are in this situation right now where they had, completed half their course or more face-to-face, but now they're going online, I would say, well, just as a general rule, whatever the amount of work that you put together for your class before you had to go online should be about the same amount of work that you have for your class now, right? So don't, you don't need to get rid of a whole bunch of stuff. Unless there's going to have to be some adjustments because perhaps some of those activities are face-to-face only. But try to have around that much work, time of effort put into it that the students would have put into it, so that it's a pretty good balance. So,
the one thing I will say about the balance of all of that is that you should not try and replicate the amount of face-to-face time.
Good clarification.
Right?
Go ahead with that for a minute.
Because sitting in an online space like this is not the same as what you're doing face-to-face in a classroom. And if you've got 3 50-minute periods through a week, or if you've got 2 hour and 15 minutes or whatever the setup is, that amount of time all at once, or if you're trying to do all of that time all at one sitting, trying to do 2.5 or 3 hours all at one time, that's going to be too much. People are not going to be able to sit through that. There's a kind of energy that you get from being in people's presence that in a face-to-face kind of situation that you're not going to get in an online space. And so you have to account for that.
Right. And so using some of the strategies that we talked about already, pre-recording some of the small lecture bits, having some of that interaction take place like in a discussion board or another short assignment of some kind can really help offset them. This is great. So we're running low on time here. There's one more question that we have that I think is worth discussing here. So we are in this sort of strange time period where there's a lot of people that have to isolate and stay in their homes and so forth. So how can we help students? So students are experiencing this too. So what are some strategies for helping students who might be facing additional obstacles in this shift to remote learning, to e-learning or online learning? What are some strategies to support those students?
I just think know the resources that you can refer students to. And if you don't know what those are through your institution, find out so you can be a good conduit of those resources to your students.
Exactly. In a situation like this, it's going to be important for people to keep up their mental health. It can be, the isolation that people are putting themselves in to help with their physical health is also, potentially detrimental to mental health. And so it's important to make sure that you understand where what kind of resources your university offers for those sorts of things, and that you make sure that your students are aware of all of that.
And we can be kind to one another right now. We give some
patient.
leeway where it is possible to give leeway. We can understand that the only way we're going to get through something like this is to help one another get through it. So we can be
Well said.
our authentic selves. Maybe in my case, I need to be a little bit better than my authentic self, but you know, kindness will get us there.
Kindness, empathy, forgiveness, support,
Mhm.
reaching out with that communication. These kinds of things go a very long way in a typical environment, but particularly in this stressful time that we have.
Right.
Well, I think we are out of time here. I appreciate having this conversation with each of you and the depth and expertise that you bring. So again, you've been listening to the Learning Lounge podcast. I'm Dr. Joel Gardner. We'll have this posted soon, and we hope to hear from all of you. Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.